The hum was my world. Not the chaotic buzz of the city, but the low, electric thrum of noble gases trapped in glass, waiting for a current to give them a voice of pure, liquid light. For 3 years, that hum had been the only constant in a life I'd rebuilt from scattered pieces. My workshop was small, tucked away in a part of the city that tourists and money had forgotten, smelling perpetually of ozone and hot glass. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could bend light to my will, creating glowing words and shapes that promised life and excitement I rarely felt myself. My days were a routine of careful heat and steady hands. My nights were often spent alone in my small apartment above the shop, eating takeout over the sink and sketching designs for signs that would never be made. It was a solitary life, ordered for safety and survival, not for joy. The only crack in that carefully constructed wall was a small, smooth piece of sea glass I kept on my workbench. It was deep blue, the color of a twilight sky just after the sun has vanished. I'd found it years ago on a beach I couldn't afford to visit anymore, but I kept it as a reminder of a different kind of quiet, one that wasn't born of loneliness. And then there was him, Julian Croft. I didn't know him, not really. No one like me knew someone like him. He was the owner of the Sovereign, the city's oldest and most elegant casino hotel. He was a myth, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and envy. I saw him sometimes in photographs in the business section of the paper, his face calm and unreadable, his eyes a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the light around them. He was older than me, maybe by 20 years, with silver at his temples that looked less like age and more like a deliberate, elegant frost. I'd kept a clipped article about him once. It was a profile piece, detailing his quiet takeover of the city's skyline, not through aggressive expansion but through patient, meticulous restoration of historic properties. The article mentioned his dedication to craftsmanship, his respect for the old ways of doing things. I'd read that line a dozen times, a strange, foolish hope flickering in my chest. He was a man who understood the value of things made with care. I had folded the clipping and tucked it into a book I rarely opened, a secret I didn't even fully admit to myself. It was an impossible, distant admiration for a man who lived in a different universe. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon, when the rain was beating a frantic rhythm against my workshop window. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another debt collector with a practiced, sympathetic tone that made my stomach clench. But I did, and the voice on the other end was not what I expected. It was a woman, her tone crisp and professional. She was calling from the executive office of the Sovereign. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought it was a mistake, a wrong number. I almost hung up. But then she said my name, Leo, and she said the name of my business, a name I'd barely whispered to anyone. She said Mr. Croft had seen my work. He had a project, a vintage neon sign. One of the originals from the casino's grand opening decades ago had been damaged in storage. It was a centerpiece, a cursive script that simply read Fortune. He wanted it restored, not replaced. He wanted someone who worked with their hands, who understood the soul of old things. He was asking for me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A man like Julian Croft didn't just notice a small, struggling artist in a forgotten corner of the city. It didn't make sense. I stammered something about being busy, a reflexive defense against hope, against the possibility of failure. The woman on the phone paused, a brief, silent beat that felt like a judgment. Then she said, "Mr. Croft is prepared to be very generous for the right artisan. He requests a meeting. Tomorrow." At the casino, I agreed. I didn't know what else to do. The word generous echoed in my mind, a siren song to a man who was 3 months behind on rent. But beneath the fear and the practical need, something else was stirring. It was the foolish, flickering hope I kept tucked away in a book. The thought of meeting him, of being in the same room with the man from the photograph, was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, I didn't sleep. I just lay in the dark, listening to the rain, the hum of my own life suddenly feeling too small, too quiet. Walking into the Sovereign the next day was like stepping into another era. The air didn't smell like the rest of the city. It was cool and clean, with a faint, expensive scent of leather and something floral I couldn't name. There was no cacophony of slot machines, just the low murmur of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses. The carpets were so thick they absorbed the sound of my worn-out work boots, and for that, I was grateful. Everything was polished to a deep, warm gleam. Brass railings, dark wood paneling, marble floors that reflected the soft light from crystal chandeliers. It was a place built on quiet confidence, a reflection of the man who owned it. I was led through the main floor to a private elevator, my worn jacket feeling thinner and shabbier with every step. The woman who had called, his assistant, guided me with polite efficiency. We ascended in silence, the smooth, silent motion of the elevator a stark contrast to the rattling freight elevator I used for my shop. We arrived at the top floor, the penthouse, and my mouth went dry. The doors opened directly into a large office. And there he was. Julian Croft was standing by a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire city, his back to me. He was taller than I'd imagined, his frame lean but solid in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He didn't turn around immediately. He just stood there, a silhouette against the gray sky, a king surveying his kingdom. The silence stretched, and I felt a primal urge to run, to retreat back to the safety of my humming, familiar world. Then he turned, and the force of his presence was like a physical weight in the room. His eyes, the same light-absorbing gray from the photographs, met mine. They weren't cold, but they were assessing, taking in every detail of my nervous posture, my old clothes, the faint smell of ozone that probably clung to me like a second skin. There was no judgment in his gaze, just a deep, unnerving stillness. He looked at me as if he had all the time in the world. "Mr. Vance," he said. His voice was low and calm, a quiet rumble that seemed to settle in the air. It was exactly as I had imagined it, a voice used to being listened to without ever having to be raised. "Thank you for coming." I managed a nod, my own name sounding foreign and formal on his lips. He gestured to a large wooden crate resting in the center of the room. It was long and flat, and I knew instinctively what was inside. "This is it," he said, his gaze shifting from me to the crate. "It's been in storage for 30 years. I was told it was beyond repair." He walked over to it, his movements economical and precise. He didn't ask me to open it. He picked up a small crowbar that was lying beside it and pried the lid off himself. He was careful, his hands moving with a practiced competence that surprised me. I had expected a man like him to have people for such things. Inside the crate, nestled in faded velvet lining, was a mangled skeleton of glass tubing. The cursive "Fortune" was shattered in a dozen places, the delicate curves and loops broken and askew. It was a mess. A beautiful, tragic mess. I stepped forward, drawn by the familiar pull of broken things that needed fixing. I could see the original craftsmanship, the elegant sweep of the letters, the way the glass had been expertly bent. It was a work of art, even in its ruined state. I reached out, my fingers hovering over a fractured piece of glass, a deep cobalt blue when unlit. Most people I consulted said to replicate it with modern materials. "LEDs," he said, the word tasting like an insult on his tongue. "They said no one would know the difference." He looked at me then, a direct, searching gaze. I would know, and in that moment, something shifted. The fear receded, replaced by a surge of professional pride, of shared understanding. He saw what I saw. He saw the history, the soul of the thing. He wasn't just a client with a job. He was a custodian of something beautiful. "I can fix it," I said, my voice clearer now, steadier. "It won't be easy. I'll have to heat and splice the original glass, match the gas mixture exactly to get the right color. But it can be done. It will be itself again, a flicker of something. Approval, maybe even relief, passed through his gray eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I thought you might say that," he said. "I've arranged a space for you to work downstairs, off the main floor. It's quiet, secure. You'll have whatever you need." He named a price then, a figure so far beyond what I would have dared to ask that I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was more than a generous fee. It was life-changing. It was rent for a year, new equipment, freedom from the constant, gnawing anxiety that had been my companion for so long. I looked at him, trying to find the catch, the hidden clause. But his expression was unreadable, his posture relaxed. He was simply stating a fact. This is the moment, I thought. This is the door opening into a world I've only ever looked at from the outside. But it was more than the money. It was his eyes, the quiet respect in them. It was the way he'd said, I would know he was entrusting me with a piece of his history, a piece of his legacy. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not let him down. The workspace he'd prepared for me was in a section of the casino that was closed for renovations. It was a vast, empty ballroom, the chandeliers shrouded in white cloths like sleeping ghosts. In the center of the polished floor, my workbenches and tools had been set up, looking small and out of place in the grandeur of the room. But it was perfect. It was quiet, private, and filled with a soft, diffused light from the tall, arched windows. He had given me a kingdom of my own within his. I spent the first few days just cleaning and assessing the broken sign. I laid each piece out on black velvet, mapping the fractures, planning the delicate surgery I would need to perform. It was a slow, meditative process, one that required absolute focus. I lost track of time, the world outside the ballroom fading away until only the glass and the hum of my own concentration remained. He started visiting on the third day. He never announced his arrival. I would just look up from my work and he would be there, standing near the doorway, watching me. He never spoke at first, just observed, his hands clasped behind his back. His presence was a tangible thing, a quiet weight in the enormous room. At first, it made me nervous. My hands would tremble slightly, my focus would shatter. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. But he was patient. He never crowded me, never asked questions that would break my concentration. He just watched, his gray eyes following the intricate movements of my hands as I heated a section of glass tubing over the focused flame of my torch. He watched as I gently coaxed the semi-molten glass back into its original, elegant curve. He watched for an hour one afternoon, completely silent, and then left with a quiet nod I only caught from the corner of my eye. Slowly, I grew accustomed to his presence. The nervousness eased, replaced by a strange kind of quiet companionship. His stillness became a grounding force in the room, an anchor. I started to notice the small things about him. The way his shoulders would relax slightly as he watched me work, the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes that would seem to soften in the quiet of the ballroom. He wore his expensive suits like armor, but in here, in my temporary world of glass and fire, the armor seemed to thin. He started speaking after the first week. His questions were quiet, intelligent. He didn't ask about deadlines or costs. He asked about the process. He asked about the specific pressures of the noble gases, the science behind the colors. He wanted to understand the craft, not just the result. I found myself explaining the delicate art of splicing two pieces of glass together, of pulling a vacuum so perfect it could hold for a century. He listened, truly listened, his head tilted slightly, his gaze fixed on my face. One evening, I was struggling with a particularly difficult bend. The glass was old, fragile, and I'd already failed twice, the piece cracking under the heat. Frustration was coiling in my gut. I felt his presence before I saw him. I didn't look up, my jaw tight with concentration. "It requires patience," he said, his voice calm and low from across the room. It wasn't a criticism, it was a simple statement of fact. "I'm aware." I snapped, the word sharper than I intended. I immediately regretted it, my face flushing with heat. I was speaking to Julian Croft, the man paying me a small fortune, the man who held my future in his hands. I braced myself for a cold dismissal, a reminder of my place. But he didn't react with anger. He walked closer, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the dusty floor. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes on the broken piece of glass on my workbench. "My father was a watchmaker," he said, his voice softer now, almost conversational. "He used to say that the smallest parts required the most stillness. He would hold his breath when setting a gear, as if the very air could betray him." I looked at him then, truly looked at him. The story was an offering, a small, unexpected piece of himself. The myth of Julian Croft, the untouchable billionaire, fractured for a moment, revealing the man underneath. A man whose father had worked with his hands, who understood the quiet frustration of creation. "I never met my father," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. It was more than I'd told anyone in years. He just nodded, a deep, quiet understanding in his gray eyes. He didn't offer pity or ask for more details. He accepted my small, broken offering and held it with the same care he gave everything else. He stayed for another hour, in silence, and when I finally succeeded in making the bend, I felt his approval like a soft warmth on my back. The ballroom became our space, a world suspended between his life and mine. The lines began to blur. He would sometimes bring coffee, 2 cups, one for each of us, leaving it on a clear corner of my workbench without a word. I learned he took it black. I learned that the faint floral scent in the casino was from the fresh lilies his head of housekeeping insisted on, and that he hated it but tolerated it because it made her happy. I learned these things in small, quiet fragments of conversation that felt more intimate than any grand confession. I started to analyze his every micro-expression, every subtle shift in his posture. I became a scholar of Julian Croft. I learned that when he was truly interested in something, one of his eyebrows would arch just a fraction of an inch. I learned that he rubbed the knuckle of his thumb with his forefinger when he was deep in thought. These were the tells of a man who spent his life behind a carefully constructed facade, small cracks that let the light in. And I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Did he see just the skilled craftsman, the solution to his problem? Or did he see the man underneath, the lonely, yearning artist who was slowly, terrifyingly, coming to life under his quiet, steady gaze? The thought was a dangerous one, a spark near a gas line, and I tried to push it away. But it persisted, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of our professional arrangement. The tension between us was a living thing in the quiet ballroom. It was in the way he would stand a little closer each day, in the way his gaze would sometimes linger on my mouth when I was explaining something. It was in the air, thick and charged, like the moments before a storm. I was acutely aware of him, of the space his body occupied, of the subtle scent of his cologne, a clean, woody fragrance that was understated and expensive. One afternoon, I was moving a large, heavy transformer. It was awkward, and I was struggling to get a good grip. Suddenly, his hands were there, covering mine on the metal casing. His touch was firm, steady, and shot a jolt of pure electricity through my entire body. His fingers were long and warm, his presence beside me overwhelming. "Allow me," he said, his voice a low murmur near my ear. We lifted it together, our shoulders brushing, the brief contact searing through the thin fabric of my shirt. For a moment, we were just 2 men doing a simple task, but the air crackled with unspoken things. His hand lingered on mine for a fraction of a second longer than necessary after we set the transformer down. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it felt like a declaration. He didn't apologize or pull away quickly. He just met my eyes, his own gaze dark and unreadable. I couldn't breathe. The weight of his gaze was more profound than the weight of his touch. In that moment, the power dynamics between U.S. employer and employee, rich and poor, felt both immense and utterly irrelevant. There was something else there, something far more elemental and terrifying. He broke the contact first, stepping back and clearing his throat. The moment was over, the spell was broken. But the echo of it remained, a phantom warmth on my skin, a frantic beat in my chest. He left shortly after, without his usual quiet goodbye, and the ballroom suddenly felt too big, too empty. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. He was a wealthy, powerful man. I was a hired hand. The chasm between our worlds was too vast to cross. Any kindness he showed me was just that, kindness. The quiet companionship was a product of proximity, of a shared focus on a project. I was projecting my own loneliness, my own foolish, secret yearning onto him. It was the only explanation that made sense, the only one that wouldn't lead to a broken heart. But my body knew better. My body remembered the warmth of his hand, the brush of his shoulder, the low timbre of his voice in my ear. My body hummed with a different kind of electricity now, one that had nothing to do with noble gases and everything to do with him. I was in trouble. Deep, hopeless trouble. The work on the sign became my refuge. I poured all my anxious energy, all my unspoken feelings, into the delicate task of restoring it. The glass became an extension of my own fragile hope. I worked with a feverish intensity, my hands steadier than ever, my focus absolute. If I could make this one thing whole and beautiful again, then maybe it wouldn't matter that my own life felt like it was about to shatter. Julian continued his visits, but something had shifted between us. The silence was heavier now, filled with the things we weren't saying. The small talk felt stilted, a poor substitute for the easy companionship we had briefly shared. We were like two celestial bodies that had drifted too close, the gravity of our attraction threatening to pull us from our orbits. We were both cautiously, deliberately, pulling back. But the observation continued. I would feel his eyes on me, and when I glanced up, his gaze would be intense, searching. It was no longer the detached curiosity of a patron. It was something more personal, more raw. It was the look of a man wrestling with a decision, and I was terrified of what that decision might be. One evening, he stayed later than usual. The sun had set, and the ballroom was bathed in the cool, blue light of twilight. I was working on the final letter, the elegant, looping E of fortune. It was the most intricate piece, the heart of the sign. "You're almost finished," he said, his voice startling me. I hadn't heard him approach. "One more day," I replied, not looking up from the flame. "Then I just need to wire it all together and fill it with gas." He was quiet for a long time. I could feel him standing behind me, a silent, imposing presence. I finished the final seal on the glass, my hands moving with the muscle memory of 1,000 hours of practice. I set the torch down and finally turned to face him. He was holding something in his hand. It was a small, velvet box. My heart sank. A bonus. A parting gift. A polite, formal end to our time together. It was the sensible, logical conclusion to our arrangement. It was also the one thing I didn't want. "This is not a payment," he said, as if reading my mind. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on the black velvet, was a watch. It was old, the face simple and elegant, the case a soft, worn gold. It was a beautiful, understated piece. "It was my father's," he said quietly. "The first one he ever made that kept perfect time." I stared at it, speechless. It was an impossibly intimate gift, a piece of the story he had shared with me. It was a piece of himself. "I can't accept this," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I'm not giving it to you," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "I'm asking you to hold on to it for me. A custodian." Like me, he was drawing a parallel, putting us on equal ground. He was telling me that he trusted me with something precious, something beyond monetary value. My hand trembled as I reached out and took the box. The weight of it was immense. It was the weight of his trust, the weight of his vulnerability. The carefully constructed walls between us crumbled to dust in that moment. "Why?" I asked, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. "Why me? Why this? What does this mean?" He took a step closer, and the space between us became charged, electric. "Because," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "you are a man who understands the value of things made with care." He was using my own thoughts, my own secret admiration, and turning it back on me. He saw me. He had seen me all along. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between us for a heart-stopping second before his fingers gently brushed against my cheek. His touch was feather-light, hesitant, a question. It was the most vulnerable gesture I had ever seen from him. The stoic, untouchable Julian Croft was asking for permission. And I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing, my entire being surrendering to the soft gravity of that single, momentous contact. The shared project, the restoration of the sign, had become a vessel for something else entirely. It was a reason for him to seek me out, a space where the rules of his world and mine could be temporarily suspended. We were equals in that ballroom, two craftsmen focused on a singular purpose. But as the work neared its end, the purpose was fulfilled, and the vessel was about to break. We would have to face what had grown within it. The next day, as I installed the final, repaired letter E into the sign's frame, a different kind of tension filled the room. It wasn't the anxious, unspoken yearning from before. It was a deeper, more profound sense of anticipation. A decision had been made. A line had been crossed with his touch, and now we were simply waiting for the world to catch up. He didn't come to the ballroom that morning, and his absence was more potent than his presence had ever been. It gave me space to breathe, to think, but all I could think about was him. I spent the day meticulously wiring the components, my hands moving with an almost reverent slowness. Each connection felt significant, each twist of a wire a step closer to the inevitable climax of this strange, silent courtship. The watch he'd given me to hold on to was in my pocket, its weight a constant, comforting reminder of the previous night's revelation. It felt like an anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. Late in the afternoon, One of the casino managers I'd never seen before entered the ballroom. He was a man with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Mr. Sterling, and he oozed a kind of corporate slickness that felt alien in the quiet sanctuary of my workspace. "Mr. Croft sent me to check on your progress," he said, his eyes scanning my work with a dismissive air. "He's a stickler for tradition, but between you and me, a new LED piece would have been installed weeks ago. And for half the cost." The comment was a deliberate barb, designed to put me in my place. It was a reminder that, to the rest of the world, I was just a hired contractor, an expensive, inefficient indulgence of the owner. My face flushed with a familiar mixture of anger and shame. I opened my mouth to defend my work, to defend Julian's choice, but before I could speak, another voice cut through the air, cool and sharp as ice. "The cost is my concern, Sterling. Not yours." Julian was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked into the room, his presence immediately dominating the space. He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the manager, a predator's gaze that promised consequences. Sterling's slick smile faltered, his face paling. "And the value of this work," Julian continued, his voice dangerously quiet as he stopped beside me, a subtle, protective shift in his posture that placed him between me and the other man, "is something you are not equipped to understand. Now leave us." It wasn't a request. It was an execution. Sterling practically fled, his retreat as undignified as his entrance had been arrogant. The silence he left behind was thick and heavy. Julian stood beside me for a long moment, his shoulders rigid, his jaw tight. He was radiating a protective anger that was both terrifying and thrilling. He had defended me. He had defended my work. He had claimed our shared purpose as something sacred, something beyond the cold calculus of money and time. He finally turned to me, the anger in his eyes softening into something else, something deeper. "Regret. I apologize for that," he said, his voice low. "That should not have happened. It's okay," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "He's not wrong. It is expensive. It is slow. He is wrong about everything that matters," Julian countered, his gaze intense. He took a step closer, his eyes searching mine. "Leo, do you believe that? Do you know that your work, that you, have a value beyond what men like him can measure?" His use of my first name, the raw sincerity in his question, stripped away my last defense. This wasn't about the sign anymore. It had never really been about the sign. It was about me. He was asking if I saw myself the way he saw me. I am here, now, in this moment. The air is thick with ozone and his scent. His question hangs between us, a fragile, beautiful thing. And I realize, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that I have been hiding my entire life. Hiding in my small shop, hiding behind my work, hiding from the fear of not being enough. And this man, this quiet, powerful, unexpected man, is not asking me to be more. He is asking me to see what is already there. "I'm starting to," I say, and the honesty of the words makes my voice shake. A slow, beautiful smile touches his lips for the first time. It transforms his face, erasing the lines of stress and responsibility, revealing a warmth I had only glimpsed before. It's a smile that reaches his gray eyes, making them shine like polished silver. "Good," he says softly. "That's good." The moment is a tipping point. The unspoken has been acknowledged. His protection was a public declaration of a private feeling. His question was an invitation. Now, all that was left was to act. "The sign," I said, my voice finding its strength. "It's ready. All it needs is the gas," he nodded, his smile fading into a look of quiet intensity. "Then let's give it a voice." The final stage of the process was the most delicate. I had to pump the air out of the sealed glass tubes, creating a near-perfect vacuum, before backfilling them with a precise mixture of neon and argon gas. It required absolute concentration. Julian stood by, watching in complete silence, his presence a steadying weight. He didn't hover. He gave me the space I needed, but I was aware of his every breath. As I opened the valve, the gas hissed softly as it filled the glass skeleton of fortune. It was done. The physical work was complete. All that remained was to connect it to the transformer and see if my months of painstaking labor had been a success. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was more than a test of my skills. It felt like a test of everything that had passed between us. "It's ready," I said, my voice tight. I looked at him. The ballroom was dark now, the only light coming from the city glow through the tall windows. He walked over to the main light switch for the ballroom, his hand resting on it. Whenever you're ready, Leo. I took a deep breath and flipped the switch on the transformer. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a flicker, a hum, and then, with a soft, satisfying buzz, the sign ignited. A glorious, deep cobalt blue light flooded our corner of the room, chasing the shadows away. The cursive fortune glowed with a steady, vibrant life, each curve, each line exactly as it had been designed to be 60 years ago. It was perfect. A wave of profound relief and pride washed over me. I looked at Julian, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. He wasn't looking at the sign. He was looking at me, his expression one of quiet awe. And then, he did something I didn't expect. He reached over and flipped the main switch. The entire ballroom was plunged into darkness. For a terrifying second, I thought he'd killed the power to everything. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw that he hadn't. He had only killed the ambient lights. The only illumination in the vast, empty room was the brilliant blue glow of my work. He had extinguished everything else, focusing the entire universe of that room down to the light I had created. He had made the world disappear, leaving just the two of us. Bathed in the soft, electric light of fortune, he walked towards me, his silhouette moving through the blue glow. He stopped in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The hum of the sign was the only sound in the room. I think, he said, his voice a low, rough murmur that vibrated through me. I've been looking for a reason to have you here for a very long time. The confession was simple, direct, and it shattered the last of my reservations. He wasn't just my employer. He wasn't just a patron. This quiet, careful man wanted me. The knowledge was so overwhelming, so powerful, it left me breathless. I think, I replied, my voice shaking but clear. I've been waiting for you to find one. He reached up, his hand coming to rest on the side of my neck, his thumb stroking softly along my jawline. The touch was no longer hesitant. It was confident, sure. It was a claim. His gray eyes, illuminated by the blue light, were dark with an emotion I could finally put a name to. Desire. A desire that mirrored my own. Is this okay, Leo? He whispered, his gaze searching mine, giving me an out, even now. The consent was explicit, a final, crucial brick in the foundation of trust he had so patiently built. He was a man of immense power, but he was offering me all of it in that one, simple question. I didn't answer with words. I leaned in, closing the small distance between us, and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was not what I had expected. There was no desperate, pent-up passion. It was slow and deep and sure. It was a kiss of recognition, of arrival. His lips were soft, warm, and they tasted faintly of the black coffee he always drank. His hand tightened on my neck, pulling me closer, while his other arm wrapped around my waist, grounding me. I melted into him, my hands coming up to grip the lapels of his expensive suit jacket, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning world. It was a kiss that felt right, unforced, inevitable. It was the consummation of months of silent observation, of shared space, of quiet understanding. It was the period at the end of a sentence that had been writing itself all along. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. The blue light of the sign washed over us, bathing us in its glow. Fortune, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. It wasn't a comment on the sign. It was a statement of fact. This, us, here. I laced my fingers with his, our hands falling to rest between us. His grip was firm, his hand enveloping mine completely. In the quiet of the darkened ballroom, with the hum of my creation surrounding us, everything felt simple. The vast difference in our ages, in our wealth, in our stations in life, it all fell away, rendered meaningless by the simple, profound truth of our connection. He was just a man. I was just a man. And we had found each other. The first light of dawn was filtering through the tall ballroom windows when we finally left our sanctuary. The night had passed in a blur of quiet conversation and gentle touches, exploring the new landscape that had opened up between us. There was an easy intimacy, a sense of having known each other for far longer than we actually had. We talked about his father's watches and my mother's garden, about the quiet burden of his responsibilities and the isolating freedom of my craft. We were filling in the spaces, coloring the sketches we had made of each other from a distance. Walking out of the quiet, darkened ballroom and into the waking casino was a shock to the system. The lights were brighter, the sound sharper. A few early morning gamblers were still at the tables, their faces weary. The professional morning staff were moving with crisp efficiency, their uniforms immaculate. Suddenly, the world rushed back in, and with it, a cold wave of anxiety. I was acutely aware of my rumpled clothes, of the fact that I hadn't been home all night. I looked at Julian, walking beside me, and saw him transform back into Julian Croft, the owner of this empire. His suit was still perfect, his posture still impossibly straight. He belonged here. I did not. The chasm between our worlds, which had seemed so insignificant in the blue glow of the sign, now felt miles wide. What had felt so right and simple in the dark now felt complicated and impossible in the light of day. He must have sensed my retreat, the sudden tension in my body. As we approached the main entrance, he gently guided me away from the public eye, towards a private corridor. He stopped and turned to face me, his expression serious. "Leo," he said, his voice low and steady. "Look at me." I reluctantly met his gaze. The worry and uncertainty must have been plain on my face. "Nothing that happened last night was a transaction," he said, his words precise and deliberate. "Your work is your own. Your payment is for your skill, and it has nothing to do with this." He paused, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand, a small, reassuring gesture. "What happened between us, that is something else entirely. And it is something I want to explore with you. If you want that." Too, his directness was a balm on my frayed nerves. He wasn't avoiding the issue of the power imbalance. He was naming it, addressing it head-on. He was giving me agency, reassuring me that my independence was not at risk. He was protecting me, not just from condescending managers, but from my own fears. "I do," I said, the words coming out with more conviction than I felt. This is your world, Julian. I don't know how to exist in it. Then we will build one of our own," he said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. "It doesn't have to be here. We can start with breakfast. At my apartment. Not as an employer, but as a man who would very much like to make you coffee." The offer was so normal, so wonderfully mundane, that it made me smile. It was a practical next step, a gentle easing into this new reality. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a quiet, deliberate act of reassurance. He was showing me, not just telling me, that he wanted to meet me on equal ground. His apartment, the penthouse where we had first met, felt different this time. The morning sun was streaming through the massive windows, filling the space with a warm, golden light. It no longer felt like the intimidating office of a billionaire. It felt like a home. There were books stacked on a side table, a comfortable-looking leather armchair with a soft throw blanket draped over it, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the kitchen counter. These small signs of life, of a man who lived here, made it feel accessible, human. He led me to the kitchen, a sleek, modern space that was surprisingly well used. He didn't ask a chef to prepare something. He opened the refrigerator himself, pulling out eggs and bread. He moved with a quiet competence, his hands as steady making an omelet as they had been prying open the crate that first day. "I hope you're hungry," he said, glancing at me over his shoulder with a small, easy smile. I watched him, a sense of wonder settling over me. This was Julian Croft, a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, standing in his sun-drenched kitchen, making me breakfast. The surreal nature of the situation was not lost on me, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of peace. The anxiety that had gripped me downstairs began to recede, replaced by a tentative, hopeful calm. We ate at a small table on his balcony, the entire city spread out below us like a map. The air was cool and crisp, and the coffee he'd made was strong and hot. We didn't talk much. We just sat together, in a comfortable, companionable silence, watching the city come to life. The silence was different now. It wasn't filled with unspoken tension or longing. It was full of a quiet, settled contentment. It felt like an arrival. After breakfast, as I was getting ready to leave, a moment of awkwardness descended again. What now? Do I go back to the ballroom? Do I go home? What were the new rules? He walked me to the private elevator, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. The gesture was both possessive and comforting. "Take the day off, Leo," he said, his voice soft. "Go home. Get some sleep. I'll have the final payment for the sign transferred to your account today." My old anxieties flared up. The payment. It felt like an ending, a finalization of our professional relationship that might sever the personal one before it even had a chance to begin. He saw the flicker of fear in my eyes. "This is not a goodbye," he said firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple key on a plain silver ring. He pressed it into my hand. "This is for the service entrance to this building. It will bring you directly to this elevator. For when you want to come back. As my guest, not as my employee." I stared at the key in my palm. It was heavy, solid. It was an offering of trust, of access, of a future. It was a clear, unambiguous statement that preserved my choice, my independence. I could use it or not. The decision was mine. It was the most thoughtful, most considerate gesture anyone had ever made for me. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight with emotion. "I'll call you later," he said. "After you've had some rest." He leaned in and gave me a soft, chaste kiss on the cheek. "Go home, Leo." The elevator ride down felt different. I was no longer the nervous, intimidated contractor. I was a man holding a key, a man who had been seen and valued for who he was. When I stepped out into the main lobby of the casino, I held my head a little higher. I walked through the opulent space, my worn work boots no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of the craft that had brought me here. On my way out, I saw him. Sterling, the manager from the day before. He was talking to another employee, and he saw me as I passed. His eyes widened in surprise, and then narrowed with a look of dawning, resentful comprehension. He had seen me coming from the direction of the private elevators. He knew. For a moment, I froze. This was it. The test. The judgment of the outside world. The gossip, the assumptions that would inevitably be made. I saw the sneer forming on his face, the condescending dismissal. The old Leo would have ducked his head, hurried away, and let the shame consume him. But I wasn't the old Leo. I looked at Sterling, held his gaze for a long, steady moment, and gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was not a gesture of defiance or of arrogance. It was a simple, quiet acknowledgement of the new reality. It said yes, and I turned and walked out the grand doors of the Sovereign, into the bright morning sun, the key clutched safely in my hand. I had not won a battle. I had simply chosen not to fight. Julian and I were building our own world, and the opinions of men like Sterling had no place in it. The next few weeks were a careful, deliberate navigation of this new world we were building. Julian was true to his word. He called that evening, and we talked for hours, our conversation easy and natural. He didn't push, didn't demand. He let me set the pace. I used the key for the first time that weekend. The feeling of letting myself into his building, of rising in the private elevator to his home, was empowering. It was my choice, my action. When the doors opened, he was there, waiting for me. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a simple pair of gray trousers and a soft, dark blue sweater that made his eyes look almost the same color as my sign. He looked relaxed, happy. He looked like Julian. We spent the weekend learning each other. We didn't go out. We stayed in his apartment, a world away from the city below. He showed me his father's collection of watches, explaining the intricate mechanics of each one with a quiet passion that I recognized as a mirror of my own. I told him about my dream of opening a small gallery, a place to showcase not just commercial signs, but neon as a true art form. He listened, his gray eyes full of a supportive warmth that made me feel like anything was possible. We were careful. We were two men from different generations, with different life experiences, cautiously finding our rhythm. There was a tenderness to our intimacy that I had never known. It was unhurried, exploratory, full of quiet reassurances and gentle touches. He learned the sensitive spot just behind my ear. I learned that he loved having his hair stroked. We discovered the small, secret languages of each other's bodies with a reverence and a care that felt sacred. The power imbalance was always there, a fact of our lives that could not be ignored. But Julian was relentless in his efforts to balance it. When I mentioned needing a larger piece of equipment for my workshop, he didn't just offer to buy it. He researched business loans for artists, found a local bank with a program for small businesses, and helped me prepare the application. He empowered me to get it myself. He used his resources to create opportunity, not dependency. It was a quiet, profound act of respect. One evening, we were sitting on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life. The sovereign was a glittering jewel in the center of it all. From this height, I could just make out the blue glow of the fortune sign, a beacon in the night. My sign. Our sign. Does it bother you? I asked quietly. What people might say, what they might think. He was silent for a moment, his gaze on the city. Then he turned to me, taking my hand in his. I have spent my entire life caring what people think, he said, his voice laced with a weary honesty. It is the currency of my world. Reputation. Image. Control. He squeezed my hand. But when I am with you, Leo, none of it matters. You are the only thing that feels real. The rest is just noise. He looked at me, his gray eyes clear and steady. Let them talk, he said. Their stories have no power over us, and I believed him. A month later, I was standing in a bright, airy storefront in a newly revitalized arts district. It was empty, a blank canvas, but it was mine. The business loan had been approved. My dream of a gallery, a place for my art, was no longer just a dream. Julian was standing beside me, his arm resting lightly across my shoulders. He wasn't looking around the space. He was watching my face, a proud, happy smile playing on his lips. It's perfect, he said softly. It's terrifying, I replied with a nervous laugh. All the best things are, he said. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, sweet kiss that tasted of coffee and promises. It was a public space, with people walking by on the sidewalk outside the big glass windows, but I didn't care. I felt no shame, no fear, just a profound sense of rightness. That night, we lay in his bed, the city lights a soft glow through the windows. His arm was a warm, heavy weight around me, my head resting on his chest. I could feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my ear. It was a sound that had become as familiar and comforting as the hum of neon. I thought back to the man I was just a few months ago, lonely and struggling, hiding from the world in my small, dark workshop. My life had been a closed circuit, a loop of work and solitude. Julian had not rescued me from that life. He had simply shown me a door I was too afraid to open on my own. He had given me the confidence to step through it. He had used his wealth and his power not to control me, but to create a safe space for me to grow. He had seen the value in me long before I could see it in myself. Our differences in age and wealth were not a cage, but simply context, the backdrop to a story of two men who found each other at the right time. He stirred, his hand coming up to stroke my hair. What are you thinking about? He murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I tilted my head back to look at him. In the soft light, his face was relaxed, the usual lines of command erased. He looked peaceful. He looked like home. I was just thinking, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. About Fortune. His answering smile was soft and full of a deep, quiet love. He tightened his arm around me, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. And in the steady warmth of his embrace, surrounded by the quiet hum of our shared life, I finally understood. Fortune wasn't a destination or a prize. It was this. It was a quiet foundation, a safe harbor. It was the steady, grounding presence of a man who saw me, and chose me, and loved me, not in spite of who I was, but because of it. And it was just the beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.